and he always has interesting subjects and presents it very well, and so I'm going to turn it over to my buddy Waris.
Very happy to be back again in the sacred land of Lubbock with its spiritual elite.
More sacred all the time.
Yeah. We were deciding to, what to talk about, and I had this thought in my head to talk about spirituality from the standpoint of relating it to happiness. And for many of us, the failure to walk a path is we fail to relate it to happiness. That's what's going to give us long-term, real, lasting happiness. And I thought we just explored that subject from every different angle. This thing of human happiness and how it relates to spirituality and the wholeness of life. There was a show I watched some time ago, and it was a documentary on happiness. And this person went to different countries, and he was trying to see if one culture is more happy prone than other, which could be a fact. As we are individuals, so are we nations, and we have characters and propensities. And at one point he went on the street in a city in America, and he started asking people if they were happy. And almost everybody said they were happy. And on a scale of 1 to 10, about 9 or 10, people were happy. The spiritual perception of happiness is different than that. That happiness is an interval between two states of unhappiness, rather than real happiness founded in something really meaningful. And basically, they're saying is they have their purely basic human needs, physical needs rather, met. They have a job, they're in a relationship, and they're not sick. Basically, that's what they're saying. Their happiness could be gone the next day. The criteria of happiness starts to change very rapidly as we progress upon the path. And I know you're not all here when I gave talks on the 4 stages of the path, but I'll talk about that just a little bit so you have a little reference to what I'm talking about. As the path progresses, we're working towards a unity of consciousness. We're trying to step out of the multiplicity of thoughts, reactions, conflict, divisiveness, fragmentation, to a state of unity. And in working towards that unity, we also come upon really engaging wholly from our whole mind, heart, the totality of our being, into the business of living, and also attuned to the whole, not unity with the whole also. And in doing that, our conflict lessens and lessens. And actually, happiness is just to be wholeheartedly engaged in the business of living. And in that we find what we really want to do. We instead of reacting to life, which with the thoughts in its multiplicity makes us do, we respond to life as a unity of consciousness. We are every moment responding. And instead of happiness depending on outer circumstances, I have this or that and I'll be happy, it becomes a living state. It's something vibrant and alive inside. A life to be really alive. Instead of some kind of stimulus, whether it's drugs or experiences, or you come out of experience. And now I will draw a little bit on Eastern teachings, because eventually when you go ahead on the path, at a certain point that comes into play. The experiencer and the experience eventually becoming one. I'm remembering a documentary that I saw. It was about people living happy long life, over 100, and they were asked, what's the secret of their long life? And a few of them that had really good, clear minds even said it in very clear words. A certain emotional resiliency. Meaning that you're not really affected very much from the outside. It starts to become an inner state. A lot of times you will hear, especially Eastern teachers, say, happiness is a choice. And the way we have grown up with the mirror of the word telling us always that it's dependent on this and that, we don't want to accept that at all. It's very hard to accept that. But if you really pay attention, if you really surrender to the truth of it, happiness is really a choice. And I can talk about that a little bit, illustrate what is meant by that. You can never really, will ever be able to control the outer circumstances of your life. It's a very simple fact, right? People will die, people will get sick, people will leave you. Things will happen. So, but how you respond, how it affects you, you can train yourself to respond in a certain way. Sometimes it's given by a culture, how we respond. For instance, how we respond to death. You can learn from that. How each culture, because of their conditioning. If you watch how they're conditioned, you can also learn that, I can train my mind to look at it differently. In the Hindu culture, there's a different reaction to that. In Islamic culture, there's a different reaction to that. In the Japanese, this thing of harakiri, where this form of suicide, when one had a very ancient thing, where one was dishonored to commit suicide. It's still that thing still exists in the collective, and it's still a lot of harakiri happen in Japan. So if we really start to watch our thoughts and our reactions and see how they're conditioned, then we can also learn that we can condition our either in the first step, condition our mind to a better state, and then eventually along the spiritual path uncondition the mind, because that's what all the mystical disciplines, all spirituality points to. And I'm going to eventually go into that more, because that's my whole point, is to want to take you there and understand that why these great beings have sought that is because the only lasting happiness is rooted in that.
It's what?
In the highest path.
I didn't hear the word though.
Rooted.
Rooted.
Thank you.
Rooted. How did Lord Buddha get on the path? From the earliest days as a child, he wanted to know the source of suffering. That's what it was about. He wanted to know the source of suffering. And the day he was born, his father called the greatest astrologer in the country to make a horoscope, and tell him about the nature of the child. And the astrologer said he will see human suffering and he will want to know the cause of it, and nothing will matter to him. He will leave this palace and he will leave his kingdom and he will go looking for the answer for the suffering. And so the father tried to hide suffering from him, so he wouldn't leave anybody eventually saw it, and he eventually left home. And then he did discover the root. Then just like the word nirvana in the Buddhism, the word for that same high state in the Vedic is samadhi. You heard that word, right? All of us have heard that word.
Right.
Do you know what that means? Sama buddhi. Sama means equal. Buddhi means the higher mind. That in your higher mind, from your higher mind, you draw a state of equal-mindedness. Equal-mindedness means nothing can affect you. And how can we come to a state where nothing can affect us? How can we come to a state where nothing can affect us? For us, for most of us, it would have to be in steps, From extreme multiplicity, reduce it to much less multiplicity, and gain more clarity. But if you examine closely, all great teachers, whether it's Christ or Buddha or the Sufis or the great Christian mystics, they all point to the same thing. And but humanity is still very much, according to the esoteric teaching, is very much in its infancy. And as more people, more teachers come, the bridge they have built to that becomes stronger and stronger. And we will have more courage to see, more depth to see the truth of that and walk that path. But it is the same thing. If Christ is saying, if Buddha is saying that desire is the root of all suffering, and Christ is saying, perfect love is the highest state and highest happiness, and perfect love casteth out fear. They're saying exactly the same thing. One is coming from the wisdom aspect, one is coming from the love aspect. One is, Christ brought rationality into spirituality for the first time. He anchored that quality. Buddha, did I say Christ?
You said
Okay,
Buddha.
Buddha brought rationality into spirituality. That's why he's the master of wisdom, the first master of wisdom. And Christ demonstrated divine love for the first time to common humanity. But if perfect love casteth out fear, that destroys all duality. And desire is a manifestation of duality. But since at this point of evolution we're totally caught in desire, and we identify that with life, any talk of higher spirituality is too challenging for us because we don't want to give up the world of desire. So what is it that is offered in place of desire that is so perfect and so fulfilling and so much of a perfect happiness? That is the higher inquiry. And to really engage in that inquiry from our heart, maybe one of the most powerful things that you've ever done. The perfect love that casts out fear also destroys duality. Without fear, there is no duality. There's no duality of thought. People have done, in this century, people have done all kinds of experiments with the mind and all kinds of experiments with hypnosis. And years ago, I read about experiments where subjects during hypnosis were told that there's no past and there's no future. For 5 hours, you will have no in your mind. You will not go back into your brain cells into your past. The past will not reflect in your life. Without the past, there's also no future. And so that you stay in the moment. You stay totally in the moment. And in those few hours, people experience the ultimate bliss, the ultimate happiness, because they were freed from this thing of psychological time. When we're always projecting in the future. Now that brings us to the subject of what I call, which we have done talks on, the I inquiry. Go a little more into the I inquiry. What is this I inquiry? one reason I wanted to do this talk also is just come to this eye inquiry thing from another angle, because since I talked blog, there was so much more meditation that I wanted to do that. The eye inquiry basically inquires if we can be free from this psychological entity me. You know, the psychological entity me disappears if there's no fear. Because all these self-images, all this self-concern about me, is all gone. If there's no fear, the whole psychological structure falls away. So if there is a question that there's this question, and it's a fair one, because this world, everybody you see, the whole world, is based on fear and all its offshoots, which is greed and violence and, taking what is not yours and not living peacefully and not sharing, which is all have to do with fear. So the question, is it really possible to live without this psychological self? Everybody understands verbally, right? What this psychological self. It's this thought that I am we take it so much for granted that when you go into it, you say, well, then what? If I'm not me, then who am I? If you're not constantly thinking of you, you'll just be busy in the business of living, with love, with no thought of your separated self. This whole structure of thought as me is based on fear. With perfect love, the psychological self disappears. That is the eye inquiry. Now, we're not all there, and that is the state of what's talked about as the state of bliss. In the Alice Bailey teachings, the Master Jal Kul describes these, all possible states of happiness. He says in the beginning, common human beings, what happiness is based on satisfaction of fulfillment of our basic needs. And the sum total of that is happiness. The next state is living, going a little beyond the personality and living as a soul. You start to feel a purpose to a soul, to live a life with meaning, start to see others as a soul, and that's joy. Is differentiating. And the third stage, which comes after the third and fourth initiations, when multiplicity, duality, all completely disappears, and the state of perfect love, after fear has been casted out. That's the state. That's the state of non-duality and bliss. That's bliss. And bliss is not dependent on anything. It's the birth of this living happiness, which is not dependent on anything outside of yourself. It's the happiness of pure being. Anything before that was the happiness within the process of becoming. And this, I'll become that, and become happier. This happens, and then I'll become happier. And it's always out there in this psychological future. Time for most of us is psychological time. It's not chronological time. It's psychological time because we have created through this duality the past and the future. So what is that question?
So, how does one achieve the things that you're speaking of? Did you hear me last time?
Mm-hmm.
How does one?
I didn't know if you heard the question.
How does one?
I asked how one achieves
How does
the
one?
state that he's speaking of.
It just came at the right time because that would have been my answer even if you hadn't asked the question.
Yeah.
How does one achieve? As far as the bliss part, coming to the living of love and state outside of duality, you're posing the question of achievement within the psychological time.
Mm-hmm.
You're still gonna get caught in the becoming. You're not gonna get there. That takes care of that. Okay?
Thank you for answering that question.
Yeah, but when you can really understand that, you can give up all this thought, all this structured thought. When you really understand that. Now you might modify your question and ask, when I'm not there, and it doesn't look like I'm getting there anytime soon, is there any possibility of happiness? To which I say, excuse me, that would be the result of the ripe fruit. When you've come to the, when you come to the end of thought and thought has not led you anywhere, and you're forced to look at thought, as the ultimate duality and drop all thought. And thought goes. But what do you do before that? So, one of my two fingers will come up for the answer. This is evolution, and this is saturation. You can always saturate your personality. You're still in the personality, very much caught in the personality when you're in duality. Through drawing an energy of a dimension higher than the one you're in, you bring in the happiness, a certain state of happiness. It's not the same as bliss. Only bliss will be bliss when you're free from the duality of thought and separation. But the occult aphorism, energy follows thought. Energy follows what you dwell on, you become. So the company of those, through words, through sight, through reading, through watching videos, the company of those that live that bliss, you draw some of that into our lives. Many activities will draw that energy too, just by divine law. The activity I've mentioned that almost every talk. Service draws that higher energy in a powerful way. I know of no other way to be happy while we're still in duality, except through understanding the principle of energy follows thought. What you dwell on, you become. And therefore, the company we keep through actually choosing our friends, choosing books, people, vocation, neighborhood you live in, however you want to do it. The energy